Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the latest edition of CouncilCast, the official podcast of the Council of Insurance Agents and Brokers. My name is Zach Ewell, Technology Associate here at the Council. Today, we're joined by Brian Comerford, Director of Strategy, Governance, and Innovation at IMA Financial Group, and Nick Lozano, IT Director at the Council of Insurance Agents and Brokers. Just last year, Nick and Brian started a new podcast called Lead.exe. It's a podcast that discusses leadership in technology. I had a chance to sit down with both Nick and Brian and discuss technology, where it's been, where it's going, and where it is right now in the insurance industry. Enjoy. All right, so first question. So there are tons of tech and IT podcasts. What sparked the idea to create your own podcast now? Was it that you both wanted a hobby or something to have fun with? Or did you find that there was a blind spot within the tech and IT podcast community?
I would say that, from my perspective, already being passionate about leadership and technology, I've been in a management role for so many years that really the best way for me to try to keep my own skills fresh is having conversations with other technology leaders and, reading a lot of resources, finding whatever information that I can from the web, and, really being able to participate in direct conversations is something that I know Nick and I have both, shared a lot of passion around, particularly with some of the work that we've done in our CIO working group. And I think part of the process for me, also having a background in broadcast media already, was that a natural extension of some of those conversations was something that could be more public facing. So I can't take credit for saying, hey, I've got a great idea here. Let's push this out into the world. It really came out of a lot of mutual interest shared by Nick and I, and really Nick just stepping forward and saying, hey, let's just do this.
Yeah, I think
that's fair.
I think it's a fair statement. And I think us as technology individuals, we kind of have that, where the heck am I going with this? We always have this, feeling that we always need to be constantly learning, right? We've spent our time always like, okay, what's the newest language? What's the newest technology? What is Amazon doing? What is Google is doing? Looking outside of whatever industry we're in. But we haven't spent as much time doing that from our soft skills side. Like, I don't know about you, but there's been times where, I've talked to people and you bring up the words emotional intelligence. And, that's a squishy, feely, type of topic, but you'll find a lot of people in the technology fields who just don't know what that is. So our idea of doing this podcast is more of a way for us to learn ourselves, I would say, Brian, right? It's us plugging our curiosity, to learn these topics and things that we feel are, top of mind that people should be thinking about. And there's things that Brian and I think about all the time.
Sure. I mean, that makes sense after listening to a lot of your conversations. You all seem to be very into the questions you're asking, which sounds like a dumb statement, but I mean, it matters because I've listened to and read a lot of interviews where.
So I'll tell you, Brian and I's mentality of this is, and Brian has a broadcast background. A lot of things will feel like scripted because they'll give guests, questions. We're going to ask this question. And then after that question, we'll ask this question. And then after that question, we'll ask this question. We always like to give our guest one question, right? Like, we might talk to somebody about data and we're like, okay, like what's the number one topic that you see companies are getting it wrong when it comes to data. And that's the only thing we'll film with. The rest, we want it to feel like more like a natural conversation. So we don't ever really prep our guest, right? Brian, I would say like we give them one question. They might, some people come back just like, hey, don't you have a whole topic you want me to talk about? It's like, no, I mean, this this is a podcast. We just want to ask you a question and see naturally where the conversation goes.
Sure.
Because if you keep it more natural, at least I find that it keeps it more interesting. You tend to go in more directions and prod and ask more questions that you wouldn't if everything had question 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Mm-hmm.
It's dialogue more than it is, a canned prepackaged program. And I think the other thing that, being a podcast, having that authenticity of it really just being a natural conversation, that's again part of where the value comes from, because we'll explore challenges that might not come to the surface if we were sitting in a more formal, sort of setting where, someone who may be one of our guests might be a little more guarded about some of the things that they might want to disclose.
Sure. So next question, what is the strongest misconception around IT in the insurance industry?
I would say that the strongest misconception about technology in general is that it sucks, right? We're in a point now where technology has been consumerized. What I mean by that is ever since the invention of the iPhone, consumers have had their hands on some of the most advanced technology year over year over year. There used to be a point in time when you would go to your office and that was the best computer you could get. That was, the best internet you could get. Nowadays someone comes into their office, they log in, it's a Windows machine, and they're like, I log in, this thing takes 45 seconds to log in. What the hell is wrong with this computer? I log in on my MacBook at home and it just logs in. But little they didn't know on the back end is that, we have security checking their permissions, it's checking the server to say, hey, what can you access? Okay, what office are you in? What printers do we need to attach to this? What network shares can you attach to? All those things that end users and consumers don't think of. I would just say as technology has kind of rapidly changed, it's been more consumerized with Apple and Google and Facebook. Some of these huge players who have high investment R&D dollars in the space. So I would feel like that people feel like technology sucks in general in a workplace setting, not just insurance in general. I'm sure Brian can add to that a little bit more.
I think specific to the insurance industry, there has been, I think one of the constraints for the industry is, like the banking industry, insurance was one of the first industries to computerize early. So that was a good thing because, in the 1960s, not a lot of industries were leveraging technology to advance, how their companies worked. But part of the constraint comes when that is all of the legacy that's been put in place that's now actually holding back much of the industry. So we've got a lot of aging systems that are not attuned to having modernized features like easy integration with web services or easy portability of the data that's actually stored in the system. And part of what Nick was saying about the consumerization, we're all, we as IT consumers in general are all very familiar with how easy it is to download an app on your phone, to use a service like If This Then That to create your own custom automation to help make your life more efficient and easy. And all this stuff just seems to work together, and it's easy to integrate and it's fast. And, so it kind of correlating to what Nick was saying about, the idea that technology sucks. It's more that, technology sucks because all of this stuff that's in the walls of the insurance industry today wasn't really designed around a lot of those modernized principles of high availability, high integration, high data accessibility that we've become very familiar with as consumers. And so consequently, it makes us feel like in our home life, we may have a much more efficient interaction with our technology than we do actually when we get to the place where we sit in front of a computer the longest, right, at work.
Yeah. And I'd like to add that too, that it's not just the insurance industry that's feeling that, it's probably any highly regulated industry itself that is feeling the same thing that this industry does. Because I know before when I worked at Accenture, it was like, you'd build like a school system with PeopleSoft, and people were like, well, why does PeopleSoft suck? It's the same thing when you deal with a highly regulated industry. The change can't come in there super fast as it can in the public consumer sector, where there's almost no laws. And now we're talking about regulating these companies to a point where they have, in the EU, they have to forget you if you tell them they need to forget you.
Right.
One thing that I guess it was mainly you, Nick, that you touched upon was when back in the day, you used to go to your place of work, and the technology, the computers, were actually better than what you had at home. It was similar for me growing up. However, the thing is it was school.
Yeah.
School computers.
Right.
And also this is where, I must say my bias towards Macs come in, is that
you had the Apple IIs, right?
Yeah.
Killing everything in Oregon Trail, right?
We didn't even have that.
That's what I was doing.
I was more
Print that.
2000. I was more of a 2000, so we actually had like the colorful Mac. I don't even know.
The iMacs.
Yeah. So, but that's something.
The return of Steve Jobs is what you had.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so that's something interesting that you said that I just wanted to comment on, because.
And it's well, school and work, right? Because you're dealing with some place where they had enough resources to buy the internet, the business grade enterprise class internet, the enterprise type of equipment, where back then consumers didn't get access to that type of equipment because it was just, it was priced out of reach for most individuals.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
One other thing I was going to add if I could, another challenge that I think with technology right now in insurance is the rise of what's termed insurtech. So much like
I hate that word too. I was just going on the record. I hate that.
much like what the entire financial services, especially banking, went through about 15 years ago. Yeah, fintech.
Uh-huh.
That's just dorsal fins, but yeah.
You saw things like the rise of online banking, and this is all coming from very upstart community tech developers, very much in the same way that we're seeing it in the insurance space right now. Part of what makes that challenging is there's a lot of hype and noise that we as technologists in the industry have to sift through to find out what's the real deal, right? There are a lot of, I think, very viable technology startups that are operating in what we would call the insurtech space. But there's also a lot of point solutions and a lot of utility players. And part of what that means is, you might have a little piece of a challenge solved by working with one of these insurtech providers, but it doesn't really give you a holistic solution to a larger set of challenges. So for now, there's a lot of research that ends up being incumbent on technologists to find out, where are those really viable partnerships that could benefit our organization within the industry. And then because we're a state-by-state regulated industry, there's also a lot of challenges with tech startups coming along who really haven't taken the time to understand all of the variances of how our industry is governed, and they think they've created a solution that's going to be a holistic solution, and it doesn't work in a lot of states just because of the regulatory nature of the industry. So for us, it can be hard when you've got someone who is in sales in your organization or in executive management. They've gone to a conference, they heard about some gee whiz thing, and they want to come back and find out, when can we get some of that? And there are a lot of other considerations that have to go into the discussion before you just grab a solution, plug it in, and try it.
Often millennials are looked at by older generations as tech wizards, if you say, since they are digital natives. However, what issues in tech and IT leadership do you think millennials and Generation Z will have to deal with when they become the dominant workforce and move into leadership roles?
I'm going to start off by, I hate the word millennials. I just can't stand it. When we talk about these generational gaps, Well, let's get to this point too. Like the average age of a millennial is probably in their early 30s, right? Like we look at this thing and we've constantly been talking about millennials are going to be different. And I just saw an article the other day, it was like, oh, millennials are different. They love to live in cities. But here's this article. The millennials are moving out of the city because it's expensive and they have families. I'm like, well, that's what everybody else did, So I think, like millennials, I would say are the first generation probably where technology was introduced in school. And everything, but they're not fully digital natives. I would say that probably.
Could I interrupt you real quick? When you say technology, could you describe that real quick? Because there's other types of.
So when I say technology, I'm talking about the big boom of the internet, right? Which is like when you had access to Wikipedia, when you had an iPhone, when you had a computer. When you had a computer, you didn't have to use a Tandy word processor or go to a computer lab. You had access to this stuff just at your fingertips, right? Because computers have been around. For a long time. It was just whether you had access to them or not. And what I would say is, like the Gen Z generation is the first generation that's coming up who are digital natives. And, to them, your cell phone is just a camera, right? It's not, like there'd be a point where Brian and I would say, oh, well, it's a digital camera, right? Did you have a digital camera? To them, like they don't have an idea what film is, right? So they're a digital native. But I would say that when we look at people in general and we split them in generations, I always just have an issue when people are like, oh, these are millennials, they really like to know what they're doing and that it has a benefit to their life, right? They want to be doing something that means something. But isn't that everybody, right? Isn't that every generation, everybody wanted to do something? Maybe these are just the first couple of generations that were pretty vocal about it. And the internet has made it possible that someone can post a web blog somewhere out in rural West Illinois and everybody around the world can see it instead of just that person in the small town. I don't think there's as many challenges from a generational standpoint as what has been around from previously before. But I digress. Maybe Brian can give this better. I can. I'm just getting on my high horse and talking about how Brian, I hate people say that millennials are terrible or Gen Zs are terrible.
Before you answer, can you remind me? You a millennial or you a?
Oh no,
you're not.
No, I'm Gen X.
Gen X.
So sometimes I'm Gen X and sometimes I'm millennial.
But Nick,
it just
you're
depends
a
on
millennial,
where you put
right?
it. Yes and no. It depends on what research paper you're looking at.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm one of those guys who, my first computer lab experience was in 7th grade with Mac Apple Classic 2s.
Yep.
And while they were networked together, there was no place to go on the internet. In fact, there was no World Wide Web until the year I graduated with my bachelor's degree from college.
Well, it was DARPANet was there, but
well, yes, yeah. Well, the internet existed, but not the web. That's I think part of the perspective that I end up having, and probably Nick, where he's positioned sort of intergenerationally, there were a lot of things that are easy now that came with a different set of challenges in prior years, and so you had to have a mindset of curiosity and creative exploration that looks different from what I've experienced with a lot of millennial workers that I've had to interact with, where there tends to be less curiosity in terms of getting in and really trying to make something conform to the solution that you're trying to solve for. It's almost more like if you don't have a preferences prompt or a configuration wizard, I've seen folks tend to get lost because they're not equipped to think through things in quite the same way. Now that's obviously not true from, the perspective of, I've got an 11-year-old son who, he's grown up only in a world where every computer has a swipeable touch screen. And when you go to code something, you can click in modular blocks and, build a video game in, 60 minutes, right? So
You didn't have to
there's
actually know how to do physics to apply the physics,
right.
the principles. Yeah.
So there's a there's a very different mindset for that digital native kind of perspective than perhaps where I came from. But I think that for me, a lot of what I feel as a mentor I can help impart on younger generations is having more of that empathic kind of view that I would characterize more with a role that we would call a business analyst today versus someone who's necessarily a technologist. And what I mean by that is human-centered design, or what you hear termed a lot as experience design today. Those are things that they're kind of hot buzz terms, but they're foundational principles really to how software has been developed for decades. And it seems to be a set of characteristics that I have noticed have been lost because there's a lot of, hey, let's plug it in, turn it on, and start clicking around, and we'll play with various configurations until we find what works. Versus, before we get to any technology, let's sit down and let's have a dialogue. I want to get in the chair of someone who's actually working, at the desk level, who's experiencing some of the challenges. So that I can ask some diagnostic questions and get to an understanding of where the challenges are before we ever go out and try to find technology solutions.
Yeah, and I'll add a simple example. And he said user experience, and I saw this great image from somebody. It was like, okay, so you want to talk about user experience and design, right? So look at a glass Heinz ketchup bottle, right? It looks really great sitting on the table, right? You open it, makes a pop sound when it opens. But when you try to get the ketchup out of it and turn it upside down, it's a terrible experience, right? It's something that looks beautiful, makes a great sound, looks great sitting on the diner counter, but it's a terrible experience, right? As opposed to now you look in the ketchup bottles are plastic and they're squeezable, right? It doesn't look as nice, but it's actually solving a problem that people have asked for, where the other one, a design of somebody just thinking of what somebody wants instead of actually asking their customer or their user what they're asking for, which is what a lot of technology projects, or I would say a lot of projects just in general, where people go sideways is they're like, we know what our customer wants. Our customer wants this. It's like, well, okay, well, did you actually ask your customer if that's what they want? Or otherwise, you're just assuming that's what they want. We have that tendency in technology to kind of try to guess, right, Brian, what our users or our customers are want, when that's the wrong position. It should always be checking with your users or your customers first to see if hey, am I going down the right road here?
Yeah, I use a phrase with my teams pretty consistently, which is a very simple phrase: get in the chair. And that's my way of saying have some empathy to whatever the situation is, right? If someone says, I'm having difficulty with a Skype meeting, and from a troubleshooting perspective, the technologist walks over and they look at all the settings and everything looks correct, and they can see that, well, it's connected right now. That's not really analyzing the situation. That might be troubleshooting the technology, but you're not asking questions of what's really going on with the human-computer interaction there, and that I think is one of those areas where there's a lot of growth, and it's especially needed for up-and-coming leaders in technology, because technologists tend to think in very binary terms, right? It's either on or off. And if it's on, well, then the technology must be working perfectly. But a leader, to my mind, has the ability to navigate through a lot of gray area. And that might be asking questions that get you to details that are understated by the obvious.
Sure. So my next question, you guys are going to be so excited. Currently, there are a lot of insurtechs out there trying to make names for themselves and apply their tools and expertise into new technologies and markets. What are a few that you think our readers should watch out for in the future?
Okay, so I'm going to add one, and it's not an insurtech company.
That's fine.
It's going to be Salesforce, right?
Mm-hmm.
They just released the financial services cloud, which could render a lot of what some of these insurtech companies are doing obsolete. The great thing is about Salesforce is they've kind of deemed themselves as platform agnostic. It's like, hey, this is a place where you put your data, and if you want to get anything out of it or plug anything else into it, go for it. So outside of the insurance industry, most industries in general are kind of positioning to this place where they have had these monolithic systems that tried to do everything. Think of like a Leatherman knife, right? You pull it out, it's got a pair of pliers and it's got a corkscrew bottle opener and it's got a nail file. It does all those things, right? But it's not a great pair of pliers. It's not a great nail file. It's not a great knife because it's trying to do everything. Where Salesforce is coming in, they're like, okay, we're just the pliers, right? If you want to plug any other best in breed thing in here, go for it. You know, we can't possibly answer every XYZ scenario for you for an accounting system. We're not an accounting system. We can't make that perfectly. You know, we're not a policy management system. Go plug something else that can do that. I would say the big thing that people should look at is what companies like Salesforce and the bigger players are doing to come into the insurance space.
My last question.
All right.
And it is pretty specific. If
That won't keep us from rambling.
Rambling, man. I'm telling you,
If
man.
you were to pick anyone living today to be on your podcasts, who would each of you interview and why?
Living today. You go first, Brian.
Wait, anyone living today? It has to be living?
It has to be living, yeah.
Oh, gosh.
And I want to preface, it can be anybody, like as long as it's in your podcast. But I mean, I understand you guys have interviewed everybody from CIOs to photographers. So I mean, yeah,
Sure.
it can be anybody with the angle of your podcast.
You know, I'm going to go with one that is, you know, someone's probably going to say shame on you. That's so obvious, but I've been caught up in this Netflix series on Bill Gates' brain. I don't know if you've seen anything about it.
No.
It's been really fascinating exposure for me because, you know, I felt like I knew a lot about Bill Gates. I've never really thought of Bill Gates as an innovator. You know, more of a fast follower who is able to take the innovations being created by others and bake them into a mainstream product delivery, just faster, you know, and more effectively, I think, than a lot of his competitors. But I think what's particularly interesting about him at this phase in his life is number one, he's married to Melinda Gates, and she's a pretty fascinating person in and of herself. But number two, together they, you know, co-chair the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which is out in the world trying to solve some issues that I just find fascinating, and particularly given that they're trying to do things like eradicate diseases in all parts of the world that have been solved in the Western world for a long time. They're trying to figure out how to deliver safe, clean drinking water to 6 billion people on the planet who don't have it. And they're really using both their funding as well as their network to be able to do outreach with just all, I think, the most innovative minds in the world to come forward and help solve this. And so it's really, to me, it's really fascinating because, you know, I've often wondered why we don't have things like the World's Fair any longer, right? Where you would bring together all the best in class of the world's innovators and have a showcase around, you know, this is what the future can bring us.
Well, it's on the internet.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you know, this to me is a way, you know, and there's a lot of different examples of it, you know, whether it's, you know, the X projects and all these types of things. But it's a way to create outreach, to motivate people to steer their creative thinking towards solving challenges that might not necessarily be the first thing that they're thinking about. But because, Bill Gates, his work with the Gates Foundation has helped drive towards these very specific goals, it's almost like it sharpens the focus for everybody to go take a look at it and figure out, hey, we can solve this. I mean, it's almost an Apollo project kind of approach.
Really? Wow. I got to watch that documentary. So Bill Gates, just to make sure.
Yeah, Bill Gates. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that guy.
Well,
the guy, the guy whose company is responsible for a lot of the bane of my existence when it comes to technology. Yeah, I'd love to talk to him.
Yeah, I'm gonna say Steve Ballmer. No, I'm just joking.
Oh, wow.
I think, not to interrupt you, I just remember that famous. It was a voice bite. Soundbite where he said iPhone will never take off because it doesn't have a clickable key.
Oh, a start menu.
Yeah,
start button.
Yeah, he didn't. It doesn't have like a textable. Yeah.
Yeah, and then Microsoft went ahead and took the start button out of Windows 8, and that went well for them. Well, I think for me, I would say Bill Gates as well. But if I have to pick one that Brian hasn't said, I would say Richard Branson. And a lot of them is because he does have that philanthropy mentality, the same as Bill Gates. He's built his fortune kind of all by himself. I mean, I know Brian, who came from the music world as well too, knows Virgin Records, and he started that as a 17-year-old, just in his house, never went to college, his mom's garage. And he's just kind of always devoted to taking any money that he's had to try to build something better, right? He was out doing privatized commercial space flight before SpaceX or Blue Horizons or any of this stuff existed. And everyone told him he was absolutely insane for doing this. And he's just like, well, I don't care. This is something, space travel should be privatized, and I'm going to try to do it. And then he'll go out and he'll try to fly a balloon around the world for some unknown reason because he read a book, and he actually attempted to do it. And I think they came up short, didn't they?
Yeah.
They didn't make it all the way. But what I like about him is, he sees something that he has his sights set on, and he just goes after it. He doesn't care what the public thinks. If he thinks it's the right thing to do, he just goes out and does it. And like Bill Gates, he's given away a lot of his money. That's the type of things that you don't see with Jeff Bezos, where a lot of people praise him. But to me, I don't really see him as a leader because he's not always doing what I always feel like a leader should be doing. A leader should always be giving more than they're taking, right? You're not in a leadership level and you're not successful as a leader if you're not trying to give as much as you possibly can. And I think it was Patton, right, who was a general in World War II. And I could be getting this 100% completely wrong, so don't quote me on it. But I think the story is he's on the front lines, and they try to give him a coat, right, because it's cold in the European front in the middle of December. And he's like, what would it look like to my people if I had a coat and most of them don't even have winter clothing? Mm-hmm. He's like, how can I take that as a leader for the people who are below me? So I just think really, leaders should be 100% giving more than they ever expect to take. You should be reaching out with your hand out to give somebody something instead of accepting something in return. I've actually never heard that quote, but I mean, that sounds on brand with what Patton would have said. Yeah. So. Don't write that because I'm not 100% sure if that's
just fact check it.
Let me make sure.
Yeah, just fact check it. But I think it always goes back to this thing too. In the military too, they're always like, I love military history, but it's always this thing, and it's like, leaders eat last, right? You don't walk up in the front of the line when you have frontline troops who've been out in the field all day and walk into the front of the line when you've just been back at the Ritz-Carlton and somebody's been out in the field and you go up and eat in front of them. You should always be letting your people do everything first.
Sure. Interesting. Yeah, no, that's
I'll add one more fact check for you, Zach. Nick said Blue Horizons, but it's actually Blue Origin.
Blue Origin. Yeah. doesn't really matter,
Bezos is
but
crying.
yeah.
And I'll just say that I was pretty pleased. I just saw the movie Ad Astra last weekend. I was pretty pleased to see that Virgin Galactic was the public carrier that's in the movie.
Well, a lot of people I feel like forget about that Richard Branson was trying to do that like in the early 90s.
Oh yeah.
And everyone just thought he was absolutely insane.
Huh.
You know, he was trying to do supersonic jet travel, and you know, he just takes risks and just not afraid to spend money. He's just trying to learn and help people, I feel like, right? It's just
Wow.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that's a great example as well.
Cool. All right. I'm going.
I could make a much longer list, Zach, but I'm gonna let you off the hook.
Thank you to our guests, Brian Comerford and Nick Lozano. For more on Nick and Brian's podcast, you can go to Lead.exe.com. And thank you for listening to the Councilcast. You can listen more on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or SoundCloud. Please subscribe and leave us a review or rating to tell us how we're doing. If you have any questions or comments for us, you can find us at CIAB.com, at the CIAB on Twitter, or you can email in at councilcast@ciab.com. See you next time.